Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fired Up, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass Education series. We have this on the first Friday of every month. It's free and open to the public. So if you enjoy this program today, I encourage you to get on Facebook or Instagram and follow our account so you can be apprised of our programming each month. And also, if you do like the program today, we have Zooms every Friday. The rest of the month, it is for members only. And we have a more expanded list of topics that we cover. We do panel discussions with gallerists and curators and art historians. We also do live stream exhibitions, exhibitions from around the world, tours of private collections, and a lot more. And what we do is if you aren't able to make those programs in person, we have a private video library for members with hundreds of videos from all of our past years of programming. And you can go in there and search and find the artists or the technique that you like and watch them at your leisure. So I will put those links in the chat later so that you can go to our membership page and join, and also see the page for our resource library to get a better idea of what that involves. All right, so now I'd love to get to our program. We have an incredible artist from the UK with us today, Ian Chadwick. He has a really highly detailed approach to his kiln forming. It's not something my brain can grasp, so I'm glad that we have him here to explain it all. And he's put together a really remarkable presentation for you guys that not only talks about his life and inspiration, but it's also going to give you a really nice look at his process and how it all comes together. So I think you're going to really enjoy it. If you have questions, please put them into the chat, and I will get to those as we get through the program. All right, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ian Chadwick.
Thank you, Demetra. Welcome everyone. I'm Ian Chadwick, 25-year-old glass kiln former, 52-year-old human. So welcome to my presentation. So as Demetra says, I'm going to go into a little bit about my life, my process, and then I'm going to focus on some pieces. There's going to be some more in-depth information on certain pieces, which are more recent. So cue the kind of awkward share screen moment, and I'll begin my slideshow. So yeah, okay. So just start the slideshow. Just put it on pause because it moves a bit too quickly for my brain. So some of you obviously probably aren't familiar with my work, so maybe some of you guys are, but the work I produce is strongly kind of focused on geometric symmetry to produce this kind of linear artworks I make. The aesthetic path that I've chosen is not a particularly easy one. The work that I produce requires a lot of accuracy, a lot of concentration, and I still consider myself a work in progress. The work that I make, I'm improving each piece as I kind of make the last. So I'm learning lessons in the last piece I make, which I try and apply in the next piece I make. So I'm a work in progress, and really at the moment I still don't know where my work kind of fits within the contemporary art world, but I'm trying to find my way. So okay, so I'm just gonna. So I was born on a little island on the south coast of England called the Isle of Wight. Interestingly, the last place in the UK to be Christianized, which I think is a kind of cool fact. I was born in 1972, which coincided with a guy called Michael Harris, which some of you may have heard of. He was a Maltese glassblower who moved his studio over to the Isle of Wight in 1972, the year I was born, and set up in, I think, a place called St. Catherine, the studio, which pretty much kicked off the whole of the UK sort of glass studio art movement. So a very important figure. As a kid, my parents would take me along and watch glass blowing. I had parents who would take me at the weekends to antique fairs and glass blowing and such like. So that kind of started me on my kind of glass journey. And I moved around a lot when I was younger. I didn't live on the Isle of Wight for the rest of my life. I moved around. I ended up living in Scotland. Um, so that's the studio on the Isle of Wight. And whilst up in Scotland, I made my first ever glass sculpture, which you can see on the screen in front of you. So on a sunny day, I sat in my parents' back garden with a hammer, some milk bottles, and a tube of UV glue. And I put together this sculpture, which was meant to represent, and kind of does represent, Narcissus, the Greek myth of Narcissus, looking at at his beautiful reflection in the mirror. And it's a lesson all about kind of self obsession and vanity. I must have been kind of a little bit precocious back then. So anyway, I entered this piece into the local art exhibition up in my little village up in Scotland, and I think it was held in I think it was a Cub Scout or like a Boy Scout hut, a little wooden structure. And 15 years old, my first art competition I'd entered, and fortunately I won first prize. So at 15 years old, having been told by my career advisor to be a dentist, I decided to follow the path of art, and in 1990, I believe, let me just check my notes. It seems such a long time ago. In 1990, yeah, I applied for art school. So I left school and I applied directly for art school. When I applied, I wanted to be a glass blower. So the only institution in Scotland at the time that was had a glass blowing program was Edinburgh. So I applied for Edinburgh. Unfortunately, I didn't get into Edinburgh, but I got into my second choice, which was Gray's School of Art in Aberdeen. And I did 4 years there. So the work I was making whilst I was there, obviously I had a kind of passion for glass. I think the optical properties of it was something that I found kind of beguiling. So I spent 4 years there. The work I was making, I was into the constructivists, a kind of mainly Russian kind of art movement, and the work I made used plastics and glass. Unfortunately, this was back in the days when we didn't have smartphones, so most of the photographs of my work were taken on slides, pretty bad slides. Thankfully, most of which I seem to have lost. So, but this is the type of work I was making, which was kind of constructed work. I was doing a lot of acid etching of mirror, and then combining those acid etched pieces of mirror together to create three-dimensional images within glass. It was a long time ago, but still some of the practices I used and understood back then, I still apply to my work now. So yeah, and then 4 years at art school kind of came to an end, and I was at a loss really what to do then. So I enrolled in some evening classes and I began working in a local stained glass studio after doing some evening classes. And the first job I ever had to do when I was in this stained glass studio was cut hundreds of diamonds, which I then had to sandblast, throw in the kiln to actually give them a kind of antique frosted look. And they then all went into this cathedral, which is up in Elgin in Scotland, which was being renovated at the time. They didn't have much money, so they couldn't afford elaborate windows, so they just gone for this diamond effect antiqued window. And I made all the pieces. I didn't put the windows together, but I made all the pieces that went into this cathedral. So that was my first kind of trial by fire with cutting glass. And as you probably know from my work, or I shouldn't get to see in my work, accurate glass cutting is something that's key to my process. So, but yeah, so I've always had an interest in geometric art. You know, I have an interest in alchemy. I have an interest in sacred geometry, math, and often, you know, in my kind of dark period between finishing working at the stained glass studio and coming down here. Whilst I was working in the evening, I would play with some of these devices. And one of the examples of devices I was playing with, there's a thing on the screen now. You can see at the top where my cursor is. This is a thing called the order of 3 magic number square. And a magic number square is kind of like a sigil or a good luck charm. I think this one was worked on by Albrecht Dürer. And I kind of took that number square, which, mathematically it's interesting because the numbers 1 to 9 are laid out in that 3x3 grid. So all the numbers in every direction add up to the same number. So it's kind of something that's been worked out. And I thought, well, if there's, the certain placement of the numbers within that grid must have a meaning. So I plotted the direction of that, the movement of those numbers within that 3x3 square, and it came up with this pattern. I then extrapolated that further, repeated it, and I came up with this repeat pattern. So this is the kind of stuff I like to play with. And further on from that, this is a thing called the order 16 magic number square. So rather than being 3 squares by 3, this one's 16 squares by 16. So the numbers 1 to 256, if I'm doing my math right. Yeah. So the numbers 1 to 256 are laid out within this grid. So all the columns, diagonally and horizontally, all add up to 2056, which is an incredible feat. I didn't actually do this. I kind of copied it down, but again, I followed the direction of those numbers within that magic number square, and it created this interesting repetitive pattern, just like before. This one a little bit more complicated. So this is one of the things I'm really interested in. Mathematics and geometry seems to have these odd kind of harmonies and serendipities within it that I don't quite understand. I don't know if anyone understands. And I believe some people call it the language of the universe. So math and geometry is the kind of language behind everything that exists in our world. And I find that really interesting. And so one of the main devices I use in my work is this thing you can see on the screen right now, which is called the geometric rose. And it's a fairly simple device. So you just have your main outside square. So when I'm designing my work, I design these kind of maps that I build the patterns upon. The outside largest square is the kind of outside area of the piece I'm planning to make. And then within that outside square, you just rotate round through 45 degrees, another square that fits exactly within that square. So this would be what I would always draw to build my designs upon. And the weird thing about this, and I never really kind of delved into it until a little bit later on after using it pretty much on a daily basis. I understood, I knew a thing called phi, a proportion known as phi, and a thing called the golden ratio. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci would kind of break down their canvases using the golden ratio, and they believed it attained a kind of extra kind of level of harmony within the work. It just seemed to be more pleasing to the viewer when you followed those proportions within the work. So I knew about phi, I knew about the golden ratio, but what I didn't realize was that the geometric rows that I was drawing on my patterns on, the proportions of the squares as they get smaller is the same proportion that exists in phi, which is also known as the Fibonacci sequence. And the Fibonacci sequence, I'm sure you're all quite aware of. It creates this kind of Nautilus spiral, and this Nautilus spiral, which is mapped on those proportions. Again, here's another example of phi and how it works. There's a number sequence, so it's basically, when you the phi sequence, you're adding the previous number onto the number you're dealing with to come up with a new number. So 0 plus 1, as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and that then, as mapped out into squares, becomes I keep pointing to the screen, but you can't see what I'm pointing at. So yeah, it maps out to create this Nautilus style swirl, which exists in nature, in the universe, in the microcosm and the macrocosm. So that mathematical proportion, which I'm using within my work, appears everywhere in the universe, and it blows my mind. It's an incredible thing, and it's something I try and kind of build into my work. So, you know, I always believe that once a piece is finished, if I follow those proportions, it has a harmony, which if I hadn't followed those proportions, it wouldn't still possess. And there's a reason I make the work that I make. You know, unique skills for a unique result, and I kind of compare them to dream catchers. So a dream catcher is something that you kind of hang in your window, and the whole idea behind it is you hang it up in the window, and any kind of spirits that are trying to get in towards you can't, because they get caught up within the complexity of the lines within the dream catcher. So the dream catcher stops those spirits getting in and influencing the person who's the other side of the window. And in the same way that a dream catcher kind of functions, my work functions in that way for me, so that the complexity and the level of concentration required to do that kind of keeps those spirits from creeping in. And yeah, so I began pretty much with nothing when I started fusing glass 25 years ago. The kiln I started using was an old pottery kiln that we dragged up from the basement of some lady's house for free, trying not to break her beautiful parquet floor. And I shared that with my mum. My mum is a potter, so we were both using this pottery kiln, this really old pottery kiln, and I was kind of just working my way through, breaking loads of stuff, but learning tons of lessons. You don't learn anything from successes, so I was learning a lot because there was a lot of failures, and so the materials and the machinery and equipment I had at the time was very, very limited. So, I always wanted a nice, fancy, large lap wheel, but I only could afford at the time to just get myself a 6-inch lap wheel. So a lot of my work developed around the machinery and the equipment I had, which in some ways is a good thing because it allowed me to kind of solve problems within my work using what I had. And those problems that I solved actually became devices in the work that I make now. So the main tool I use is this wonderful little thing called the Shinwa, and it's a little Japanese mitre square. And I borrowed it from my dad, who's a woodworker, wood turner, and I use this. It's constantly in my left hand. I use it to check my angles. I use it to cut all the components within my work. But obviously, there's a scale that this works to. So none of the components I make within my work are bigger than 6 inches, 15 centimeters long. So I have to come, obviously, if I'm building a piece that's 60 centimeters wide, I'm not going to span that distance with small 15-centimeter components. So I have to come up with devices to actually extend that design further out towards the boundary of the piece that I'm making. So majority of the work that I make, I have a love affair with stringers. I spend way too much of my meager income buying these things up. And the stringers that I use, 1mm rods of glass. I don't pull them myself. That would just be maybe one day. But for the moment, I use bullseye 1mm glass stringers, which come in a wonderful array of colors. But unlike a lot of other practitioners who use stringers, the stringer sheets I put together for my work are very organized. So within that sheet of stringers I'm putting together are several components which work within the designs that I make. So you can kind of see on the screen here that there's a number of like repetitive sections within here. and up here. So that's kind of how so it's a very deliberate placement of these glass colored stringers on this sheet, which is then pre-fired. Once it then comes out, is another example of my stringer sheets that I put together. So combination of colors within that one sheet, but again, dealing with those particular components. So again, there's a repeat section and a repeat section. Again, some more stringer sheets. You know, this is a commission I was putting together for some components that fitted within a table. So I'd been sent some pictures and I tried to match those colors, but again, laying those stringer components out within the sheet for their purpose later on. So, you know, it's very difficult when I'm teaching this to actually get this across to the people in class, because they don't quite understand the purpose of those sections until they start using them. So it's a difficult thing. You almost have to kind of have a chess brain for this technique, so you're understanding what you're working with for the next point. And even with me, I'm still learning with this technique ways to improve the kind of optical qualities within the pieces of work. There's a close-up of a stringer sheet, and we're back to the magical square. So as I say, within my work, there are different components. Those main kind of components I call chevron pieces, border pieces, and bridge pieces. And I'll try and show you how each of those different components within my design functions. So again, I begin with the geometric rows. That's the start point of all of my designs. Then I build my stringer sheets, and then the stringer sheets are deconstructed using the chinois, the mitre square, into their individual components that are then fitted onto this map. And the map allows me to keep everything nice and square within that design. So I'm following those diagonals, those horizontal and vertical lines with my design, the squares within squares that you see there, which gives you the proportions, that Fibonacci proportion that I talked about. That within there, I can follow those lines and actually then create the design, which hopefully you'll be able to see. So here's a kind of shot, a 9-image shot of how these things emerge. So as you can see, I'm starting with that geometric rose. It's a little bit different to the one before. I've actually crossed this one over because this certain piece was going to be a circular piece. So I needed those proportions going off in all directions, not just the one in the previous image. So you know, it's very difficult, you know, because when I'm making my work, you know, a lot of artists, I've heard them talk about a thing called flow. So and flow is very important for when I'm working. It's that kind of thing if you're driving home and you jump in your car, next thing you know, you're at your doorstep, and all those roundabouts and stop signs that you would have passed through on the way, you just kind of automatically kind of functioned on. And in the same way, that sort of works with my work. So I have the certain devices that make the patterns work. And generally, on a good day, when I find my flow, I start in the morning, and by the time I get to the end of the day, I look at the pattern that's on the table, and it's almost like it's kind of magically manifested. So so here, as you can see here again, the geometric rows, the beginning point, you can already see that I'm starting to build up that square within a square idea. So these components here, if you can see where the cursors are, these are what I call my chevron components. Either side of that chevron component is what I call my border pieces. And the border pieces just allow those chevron components to sit comfortably on their own within the design without having interference from another kind of different color chevron set next to them. So it kind of defines an area within the work. So yeah, the borders are a very important tool. As you can see, more chevrons and more borders then get built into that previous design. And then the next important stage, you know, I was saying that certain components are only 15 centimeters long. I need to reach something that's maybe 50 plus centimeters wide. The tool I use for that is something called a bridge, and the bridge corresponds to the squares within the geometric rows. So you have now a border, a bridge section, which allows you to reset your platform and to build another set of 15 centimeter chevron components and borders on top of that bridge section. So you can kind of see that bridge section there. So again, we now have 1 square, 2 squares, and 3 squares all kind of rotated round within each other, just like the geometric rows. And then that just kind of continues. So I'm constantly using those borders, those chevron components, and those bridges and the squares within squares to keep evolving that design. So it kind of grows on its own. You know, I have those pieces I pre-made and pre-fired stringer components, which I can then cut down and work. But there's a lot, you know, it seems there's something else at work when I make these, because, you know, there's decisions I make that I look back upon, and I just, you know, I can't fathom how it worked as well as it did. So, you know, I use my smartphone quite a lot. The problem with being in the middle of having flow when you're producing these things is quite often you forget to take the stage pictures in between, which I'm showing you now. Thankfully, when I finished building my pattern initially, every single piece has to be deconstructed again, washed, and then rearranged onto another piece of glass. So once I built this pattern in its entirety initially, it's then all broken down and rebuilt again onto a piece of glass before it's then transferred into the kiln for its firing. So it's a long process, and I have a little video here of the process for that particular bowl. This is a commission for a great friend down in Arizona. So the colors are very sort of southwest. So you can see all the stringer sheets involved in this. And again, now this is an animation that I put together, so you can see the evolution of the piece and the number of components that go into this. So I've no idea. I've never really counted the number of components, but a lot. And each one of those components, because you know, I'm pretty good at cutting glass accurately, but even with the skills I have in cutting glass, there's still some inconsistencies on those edges. So even with this, every single piece has to be taken to the lap grinder and just tidy up those inconsistencies on the edge. Otherwise, I just don't get that tight, precise fit that is something, you know, I'm aiming for. I'm still trying to get it perfect. You know, there's always, you know, they're not precise yet. They're accurate to a level where I'm pretty happy, but precision possibly unattainable. So yeah, so that was that commission. Here's another little video. This time this is black and white. So black, white, and gray offers, you know, when you do away with the strong colors, then it's a lot harder to get the impact within the work. So you have to work more on the tonal qualities and the kind of the patterns within. Let me just pause that again. Within the design. So I love working in the monotone black and grays, because it just allows me to discover new ways of arranging stringers within the pattern, which then I can take back to the colored pieces. But all my black and white pieces are always amongst my favorites. So along the way, it took me a while to kind of get to get those devices that make the work nearer to the way that I would say is the way that I want it to work. So early iterations of my work were a lot more kind of haphazard. You know, there's not the kind of same level of depth, optical kind of effects going on within this, but this allowed me to kind of understand the levels of accuracy needed to move forward with it. So some of my very early work, let me just take a quick look. I'm doing for time. Again, this is some of the early work. As you can see, some of the devices I use in my work now, in particular the border pieces, which give those very distinct string chevron sections aren't present in this work. So it made for a much more kind of chaotic design. And so, and while it's really important, I think, to find your unique creative voice. I think I found it. I think I'm making work that I really want to make, but there was a stage where I wasn't too sure, of course. So trying to kind of find out what my voice was, I was using the same process involved in the work I use now, but making more kind of randomized linear artworks like the piece you can see right now. Pieces like this have taught me quite a lot about cold working. Most of the cold working I do is done by hand. I don't have a great deal of machinery, and sometimes I just find machinery is just way too harsh for the levels of finish I'm looking for. So I do prefer to do things by hand, and quite often with pieces like this, it means I'm down on my hands and knees with hand diamond grinding tools for days at end. So yeah, so that's and also, whilst I was trying to find my voice, it's very difficult to sell quite time-consuming large artworks at some of the smaller craft events where I kind of cut my teeth originally. So I did develop ranges of jewelry. So this is some of my jewelry work which I was making at the time. So I would that would be my bread and butter when I was doing these types of events, and the other work that I made would be in the background, and hiding away because I didn't want anyone to ask how much it was, and then have them, laugh in my face sometimes. Anyway, so yeah, so jewelry I used to make. I used to collaborate with certain jewelers to make these pieces such as this. And that was kind of my thing when I first started my business as a kiln-formed glass artist. But I always kind of knew that I wasn't comfortable with making the smaller sellable commercial pieces. So when I had the time, I would make pieces like this. And this was, some of the pieces are more transitional pieces for me than others. This one in particular has a relevance quite close to where I am sitting right now. So a lot of the work I'm doing now is similar to this. So this is a two-layered arrangement of linear kind of arrangement of colors, and some of the newer work I'm making now, which I'll get to hopefully at the end if we have time, is actually taking these complex patterns and just changing the direction of them to create these interference lines on two layers. And this was a piece that I made a good few years ago now, which I called this piece Broadheath Boogie Woogie, because it reminded me when I finished it of Piet Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie, which was meant to be like looking down on Broadway with all the cars zooming around. And this was my kind of interpretation of that. And Broadheath is an industrial park quite near to where I live, so I just thought it was a funny name for it. And this was quite a large piece. Occasionally I do like to kind of challenge, because it is quite easy to get kind of a little bit relaxed within your bubble and not push your skills. And this one pushed my skills almost to the limit. Quite a large piece. It's 60 centimeters across and on two layers. Because of the nature of the way I produce my work, everything, once all the pattern components are put together, washed and placed onto their piece of glass, the whole arrangement has to be flipped over and placed onto the kiln shelf. So I use kind of kiln glue to hold my pieces in place. It's not the hardest setting glue, and when you have a load of components on the underside of a piece of glass and you try and flip it over, sometimes they can fall off. Not too often, thankfully, but they did with this one. So yeah.
I wanted to jump in, Ian, just for a minute. We have some questions from the audience.
Okay.
So one person was asking regarding your color. I noticed that one of the things that's so fascinating with your pieces is the tonal sort of gradients that you get when you're looking at them from further away. And
Mm.
Robin would like to know if you can speak to using opaque versus transparency in the context of deciding if it's color versus light passing through the piece that you're looking for, and kind of how those decisions come to be.
Okay. A lot. So yeah, color. I mainly use within my work um, opalescent colors. Um, I don't design my work to be sat in a window with light streaming through the back of it. So most of the work I produce is tabletop art. So it's going to be a vessel that's down on someone's table. So opalescent colors have that intensity the whole time. Quite often with transparent colors within their environment, unless you've got the perfect environment for a transparent piece, it kind of sucks a lot of the colors from around it and can lose its intensity. And the thing when I'm building my work, the intensity of the color and the tonal qualities within the arrangements that I put together are really important. So using opalescent glass allows that to happen in most environments. So even in a dark room, a bowl made in opalescent glass will have that same kind of radiance and effect, whereas a transparent bowl kind of loses all those details within it. So I do use transparent glass within those opalescents just as kind of design features. And also it's nice when you do have a piece that has those transparent areas, that kind of little windows, that getting the light shining through and transmitting underneath the piece, and leaving the shadow of the opalescent glass on the table, just it's almost like an artwork is created underneath the piece as well, because those transparent windows almost create a new pattern underneath the piece. So yeah, all those things are important. The sort of tonal qualities again is down to a very deliberate arrangement of the stringers. Obviously, you can't fade with strings of glass, but there's ways you can order that color arrangement to give you that feeling of it sort of fading, and certainly from a distance you get that more obvious sort of tonal quality within the work. So yeah, that's something important. Does that answer the question fully, do
That
you think?
does, yeah. And just one more. When you are creating or building the stringer sheets, how do you decide in advance how much of a certain pattern you need?
Well, it's kind of, again, as I said, every piece is teaching me a lesson, which I then bring to the next piece. So, I have a certain, I know that I need a certain number of border pieces. I know that I need a certain number of chevron pieces. I know that I need a certain number of bridge pieces. So within that structure, that within each one of those individual components, there's all kinds of different ways you can arrange your stringers, so you can. It's complex, but you know yeah, it's a complex one to explain. But yeah, I think I answered that.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Thank you, Ian.
All right. So again, as I was still trying to find my voice, I'm trying different ways of working. So this is again using stringers. I think in this case these are transparent stringers all arranged together. I'm a big fan of black, so there's some black opalescent glass chucked in there, and these are arranging those stringer components when they've been sliced into just strips cut at 90 degrees across the stringer, and then just arranged in a very particular way. So you're creating this kind of staggered effect. And these pieces, they're a lot of fun. They don't really transfer as well into a photograph because the way the stringers are arranged within them, they have a lot of movement. So as you kind of move them around, you can sort of see that in this kind of area over here. When you're looking along the line of the stringers, you're kind of losing most of the color. But then when you're looking across those strips, you're seeing the color. So as this piece moves around, it does change effects quite a lot. So, I was playing around with that for quite a long time. I know there are some other glass artists who've used this, but again, there's a lot. I just like to try and push things to the most ridiculous level. And yeah, it has to be, unfortunately. So yeah, there's a close up on some of those arrangements. And so yeah, we're moving on. So again, I'm trying different geometric arrangements. This piece, I titled this piece Binakyle. It's based on Filipino weaving, artisan weaving tradition, where they build a lot of sort of geometric movement within their designs. It all relates to uh, their kind of culture. But I find fabric is one of the best sources of kind of geometric designs out there. You know, a lot of quilt makers I look at as well. And so textile artists are a great source of geometric designs. You know, in no way am I, you know, I'm very cautious about appropriating from other cultures. So when I'm looking at the designs, but not trying to replicate them or trying to build in any of their kind of cultural references within that work. So, you know, geometric artwork has been used by many cultures throughout the ages. It's non-representational art, you know, and using geometry, you know, in Islamic art in particular, they have non-representational art, and it's their way of connecting with their God. Whereas in the Christian world, you know, we paint pictures of a guy with a white beard and a woman with a plate around her head, a halo. It's a halo, that's what it's called. So yeah, the different ways of kind of communicating what people believe are their gods, and ensuring, you know, good fortune in their lives. And textiles are great for that. So all around the world, there are textile traditions that employ these geometric devices. And this is one I found from the Philippines, at Able Loco, I think it's called, the artisan tradition. So this piece was put together looking at that. Again, I do like to kind of challenge myself. So I look at a lot of geometric kind of patterns online and think how, you know, how that would transfer into glass. Some successfully, some not quite so successfully. But again, you know, it's just nice to kind of push things from time to time. So this may be familiar to some people out there. A lot of the time when I'm working building my designs, there are a lot of leftover components. And when I have a kind of idle moment, I'll quite often sit at my workbench and just fiddle around with those leftover components. And this was born out of one of those moments. So I just had a bunch of triangles I had left over from one of my designs on the desk, and I just started pushing them together and realized they made this kind of rotating arrangement when you take those three triangles. So three right angle triangles just in there, right angle at the top, pushed together to form groups. Then the next set of three fits into that one, fits into that one. And I kept doing this, and I thought there's no way that they're all going to meet up and form this circular pattern, which they did. And so yeah, so this was you know, it's just a little aside. Again, it's, you know, it's just nice to have a break from some of the more complicated work that requires all the concentration. And this one is a little simpler, although it requires a huge amount of accuracy to get this to work correctly, which everyone who took my online bullseye class on how to make these will have found out. And so, you know, it's a kind of trial by fire of accurate cutting of 45-degree angles. And if you kind of master this, then the next, you know, doing the next type of my work is probably a lot easier. So it's a very strong test of people's cutting and looking skills. Because, you know, I when I'm in class with people, you know, the chinois that I talked about, the mitre square, you know, it's a very accurate tool. And I tell people constantly to, you know, keep using your chinois to check your angles, trust those angles. If you're not if you're not using that device correctly, then your angles are all going to be off, and then everything is just going to be just out of alignment. And so, you know, a very difficult project to do, but a quite simple geometric design. again, you can see a close-up of those arrangements. So this was actually put together with 0.5 millimeter glass stringers, so even more difficult to work with than 1 millimeter glass stringers. So yeah, and trying to get these angles correct is a complicated matter. Okay, let me just check time. I need to kind of move on because so this piece is a vanitas, and around 2018, I was kind of debating whether making glass was the correct path for my life. And so I put this piece together. So it's a vanitas, and it's based on the bell, book, and candle device. It's a Latin Christian excommunication technique for people who've committed grievous sins. But it also gets confused as an exorcism tool. So I believe there is a film called The Bell, Book and Candle, which is all about exorcism. And at the time, I didn't know what to do with my life. I was going through some stuff. So this piece was me kind of exercising some demons. And so a big step away from my usual work, but a necessary step that I needed at that time. So just to go through some of the components within here quite quickly. So the glass bell, so that this is a kiln formed glass bell, so it's a dropout vase, which I then attached this wooden handle to. There's a piece of poetry on there by a Portuguese poet called Fernando Pessoa, all about kind of going through existential crisis. And then the book, I bought an old book from a bookshop, butchered it, pulled out the pages, replaced all the pages with glass, cut a little donut hole in the top, which the vase sits in, so the wording on the bell is illuminated. There's a little kind of cast glass dangling figure of myself hanging within the bell as the clapper. The handle, as I say, my dad's a wood turner, so he turned the handle for me, and it's a profile. It's a profile of a screaming face. And then the candle, you can't really see too well what's on there, but what it actually is, I gave up smoking. Also, a good friend of mine let me down and sent me a message telling me he didn't want to be my friend anymore. So I wrote that message inside my last packet of cigarettes. And then I stamped out of that packet of cigarettes little butterflies. Butterfly is a symbol of, renewal and rebirth. And each one of those butterflies from that last packet of cigarettes with that message on the back and then pinned into the candle. So, I was just trying to get some stuff out of my system. So that piece was exhibited in a cathedral quite close to where I live. And this is another transitional piece for me. So this was the first piece that I made that had the sculpted edges. So, my work doesn't always, it's not for everyone. And, most of the time a plate like this, a bowl like this, is going to be sat on the table. And what I kind of liked about this, it came out of, I ran out of glass, so I didn't have enough to make this square, so I ended up putting these black borders on. And I like the uneasiness that it has externally now. It doesn't sit comfortably anywhere. And I kind of quite like that about these jagged edge pieces of work. They're hugely laborious, and I always regret doing them every time I do them, because the amount of cold working required for those edges is obscene. So, but again, this became something for me, and so in 2019, on the cusp of giving up glass as a thing, and I don't know, I made this piece, which I entered into the British Glass Biennale in 2019. It's called Medicine for Garmin Bosier. So I deliberately chose bright rainbow colors because it was like my rebirth. I'd gone through all that stuff with the vanitas, and then I produced this piece, and I thought, well, this is my last gasp. I'll enter it into the Biennale, and it got in, which is kind of cool. my first time in the British Glass Biennale, and thankfully it won a prize as well. It won the Worshipful Company of Glass Sellers Arts and Crafts Prize at the British Glass Biennale, which yeah, knocked me off my feet, um, and started a whole, again, sort of rejuvenated my desire to keep doing this, and so yeah, 2019. I wonder what happened just after then. So yeah, so there's a bowl in the Biennale, and so yeah, the pandemic hit. So all the exhibitions that I was invited to were curtailed or cancelled. So I was kind of back to square one, no real income coming in. I had my, my social media. So I started kind of making a lot smaller versions of my work. So we'll see some examples of that. This is another piece, again, exploring that jagged edge effect. Again, this isn't an easy thing to achieve on the edge. But again, you can see those tonal qualities there. So, you've got, I'm using the kind of monotone black and gray scale colors here alongside these fire colors to create that kind of impact within the work. And again, using the chevron sections to create all these arrangements here. You can see these border effects, the bridge sections within the work, extending it to the outside edge. So yeah, and a close-up of previous bowl. And some of my more sculptural pieces. So, not everything I make is a vessel. I did study sculpture when I was at art school. So, I do want to turn my work into more sculptural pieces. But at the moment, my focus is still upon, and it probably will be for the rest of my days, is focusing on getting these geometric patterns working to the best of their ability, best of my ability. And so I'm still kind of hung up on that. So yeah, the pandemic, I was making smaller bowls like this. So it was a kind of imposed boot camp. I didn't have anything else going on apart from making. So I was just making loads of these bowls, and I sold them as a kind of limited edition through my Instagram page. But one of the great things about doing, I think I made 156 of these during the pandemic. And the great thing about doing so many of this design, it allowed me to just hone my skills a little bit. And while I was doing it, I also developed a new way of working. And this this is showing the new, I never having a shiny surface to the work I made never really sat that well with me, because having the light bouncing off the surface allowed distortion of the pattern that I spent so much time working on. So now I've kind of changed the way I work. So now all my arrangements are done with the face that you see appearing in front of you now down against the kiln shelf. I then, once that comes out, I extensively hand cold work the surface using a technique that I found out from the Corning Museum of Glass YouTube page, where you hand work it with blocks of glass, keeping your silicon carbide the same grit level, and just softening the applicator as you go down, and you're just refining that surface and bringing it down beautifully and flat, and then just finishing with pumice, and it just gives this beautiful satin finish, which then stops a lot of the kind of reflections that you get. You just get that soft hue of light on the colors. So this is more how I work now. So you'll be seeing a lot more of that kind of surface finish. So I still sometimes cap certain pieces with clear, but most of the time now, the only clear glass that exists within my work is the clear glass I use as a substrate for my stringer sheets that I put together, because something has to hold them together. So there's a layer of 2mm clear within the layers of stringer color and the layers of opalescent glass. Now, see this piece, just trying to remember the name of this one. Yeah, I call this, I don't like naming work. It's a really difficult thing to do. This one I called Yantra Construct, and this was thankfully accepted into the 2022 Glass Biennale over here in Britain. You know, it's the main kind of showcase for British glass. It's a juried event. It's a big deal. You know, it's always a big deal for me. And that year I had two pieces in this piece, Yantra Construct, and this wall panel, which I think I call Camille. These pieces, this one 55 centimeters square and about 4 centimeters deep. This one I think was 54 centimeters square, mounted on a piece of Perspex. I handmade all the Perspex mounts for this piece as well. I think, you know, working on display is a very important thing for me. I'm trying to learn welding at the moment so I can make my own bespoke stands for my work, because it, you know, as I kind of move more into sculpture, it's becoming more and more important to actually be able to build a stand that works well with the piece. You know, I could use someone else to do it, but finances and all that. So yeah, here's another bowl, about 40 centimeters across. So yeah, mainly vessels I'm working on. Again, you can see that satin effect surface. So again, I've done away with the clear with these pieces. Different shapes. So often when I'm producing a bowl of the scale of this one and the previous one, I'll build a whole bunch of stringer sheets that kind of, so I can just produce maybe 2 or 3 pieces in the same color scheme. So these two pieces came from the same stringer arrangement sheets. And again, a different color stringer arrangement sheet. So choosing colors is always a tricky one, but you know, I just remember seeing, you know, something out in the street that kind of works well together. Maybe two cars sat next to one another, and I think, okay, well, that kind of turquoise and purple, they work together quite well. So you know, I do have a color wheel and I do use a color wheel, but generally, I just go with my gut for my color schemes. And there's something about this arrangement. I don't know if it's to do with the Fibonacci proportion, creating that kind of harmony within it, but I don't think I've come across a color combination within this pattern that doesn't actually work that well. So others work better than some, but none of them I just want to throw away. So yeah, so again, as I say, two of the same from the same stringer sheets. You can see with this one, you know, they're not the same. I think of my work as like snowflakes. So even though I have these, you know, I have the map that I build my designs upon, I have the devices within the design, each time, and it is temporarily kind of dependent on how I feel. So some days I feel like I want to do a really complicated option. Some days I want to go for a simpler option. So that the pieces evolve out of my kind of state of mind using those maps and devices within the actual process. So you can see here, this piece here, you know, I began my chevron arrangement along the horizontal part of the design and then added in the verticals, sorry, the diagonals initially, and then I added in the horizontals and verticals. With this one, I started with the horizontals and verticals and then added in my chevron components on the diagonal. And then, you know, just a different arrangement of chevrons in these sections here to create different effects. Again, focusing on that tonal quality. Another circular piece in the stand. You know, I'm kind of trying to zoom through a little bit. So if anyone wants me to hold at a certain piece, let me know, because I know I'm sort of running out of time. So a couple of totems, 80 centimeters tall. The one on the left is currently in the Stourbridge Glass Museum, along with another piece in their contemporary glass collection. And, oh, so, and oh, this piece is a piece I've just currently been working on. Okay, So this, I believe, is a video. So earlier I mentioned a 2-layer pattern that I have been working on. So this shows a piece called Vesica Piscis that I worked on recently. Sort of surfboard shaped piece with this 2-layered geometric pattern on the inside. One of the great things about kind of layering on 2 layers is you get quite interesting crossovers of color. So this is something that I'm still investigating at the moment. So yeah, and that's the piece there. And this next piece, this is my submission for this year's British Glass Biennale. So I was making a crate for this yesterday to send it down to the Midlands in the UK for the exhibition, which I think begins in August. Again, this was one of those pieces where I was testing my skills. So this, a huge amount of work. Both sides of the cleaver has a different pattern on both sides. The handle is made up of pattern bar segments that have been formed together, and then a lot of a lot of cold working, carving this thing down, carving the handle into a handle shape. The actual blade part of the cleaver fits into the handle like a metal knife, so it has a kind of tang to it. And then I built this kind of macabre base for it to sit upon. It's all about my kind of worries about the rise of right-wing politics in the world. And this is a little video, so this gets to, so it shows the pattern building of the 2 sides, the components in the handle. You see the pattern on both sides there, and then all the carved edges. So the base wasn't finished for it at this stage, but yeah, it gives you an idea of the scale. So quite a big thing, 2 patterns with a little kind of jam sandwich of red glass in the middle. So when I cold worked the edge, it exposed the red. So that piece, 70 centimeters in length from handle to tip. Let me just check. Yeah, 70 centimeters long by 35 centimeters high. So it's a fair size, and it tested my cold working skills to the limit. I think this is another video. So this piece is another piece I put together as a submission for the Biennale. Unfortunately, it didn't get in. So this piece, you see there, it has several different components. I've just paused the video. So the initial main kind of part of this is a dropped vase. Again, using 2-layered patterns arranged in a much more random way. So that's me cutting off the rim of that particular vase. That's with the rim removed, pre-cold worked. And then I was fortunate enough to be offered a residency at a great glass school in the UK called the Glass Hub, where I took some of my panels into the hot shop. I've always resisted it, again, in the same way I don't like clear glass on top. I think kind of taking something into the hot shop and bending it and manipulating it is going to stretch my patterns to the point where I'm not going to like them anymore. But with this 2-layered combination of work, it worked quite well. So while I did this residency, I had another of the components for this particular piece made in the hot shop by a very talented glass blower called Sasha Delabra. There he is, young guy on his way up. Again, we see here, that last picture, I was applying in my prototyping, I was using Phi to get the proportions of each component right. With my dad, wood turning, because the black components of the finished piece, which we'll see towards the end, are all turned wood, which I then dyed with Indian ink and burnished, and then placed the whole thing together. So you'll get to see. So this piece I called it the sacred chalice of the Technicolor unicorn. But this piece took on a particular significance for me while we were making it. During the time that me and my dad, working with my dad, gave it a significance on its own. But as we were finishing this piece, my 15-year-old niece was rushed into hospital with a brain tumor, and She's thankfully doing well, but it was a really worrying time for our family. And the hilarious, she's a great kid, and she named her tumor Glenn. So now I kind of want to reimagine this piece as a receptacle for Glenn to reside, so we can keep that nice and safe and out the way, so it doesn't cause any problems in the future. So yeah, so this piece, it's quite tall. It's over 75 centimeters tall. See, the spike on the top is hot glass. The middle part is my dropped out glass vase, and the bottom part is a base made up of the same technique. Again, back to the two layered work. So this is stuff that I'm currently working on. So that initial, as I showed you before, that single layer of the three triangles kind of eating one another around in a circle. When you do that in transparent glass, change the orientation and then lay them on top of one another, you create this incredible pattern, which has qualities that don't transfer into a photograph. There are creative, because there's a slight 2 millimeter difference between the colored components in the two layers, it's creating an interference pattern which kind of changes as you move the piece, which was one of these unexpected byproducts. So you actually get radiating arcs of interference kind of coming off that central motif. So this is something I'm still working on, something I hope to develop a little bit further alongside the work that I do. This, as we're getting to the end now, this is the piece that I finished this week. So this piece was finished on Monday. So again, I've got the step-by-step. So as you can see, the piece of glass underneath, which I'm building it upon, it's going to be the underside of the finished bowl. So it's a piece of white opalescent glass. Upon that piece of glass, when I'm building it, I've drawn my basic motif, but I've actually started now to elaborate that technique, that actual map where I arrange my pieces to get even greater level of accuracy within the pieces. So you can kind of see that building. You can see again, chevron sections, borders, bridges, all those devices used. As we move on, excuse the drawing. It's a telephone sketch down on the left. So yeah, it keeps getting bigger, bigger until it's done. And so this is the stage as I'm kind of breaking it down and rewashing it. So I always begin at the middle as I'm deconstructing. So all the central components have been taken out, washed, and rearranged on the base glass, which will be the underside of the finished piece. And it always leaves these quite interesting kind of voids within the middle of the patterns. Again, you can see that. And that's a finished piece. Again, cold worked on the surface to create this satin effect, backed with white opalescent glass, transparent elements within that, so there is some depth on the surface. So in areas like here, this is a transparent color amongst the opalescent stringers, so there is kind of depth within that surface effect as well. Again, another view of same bowl, and that's me. So that's the end. I hope I wasn't too confusing, or I didn't go over time too much, did I, Demetra?
No, you did great, Ian. Thank you so much. Really incredible to see the level of precision and patience that you put into your work, and very generous of you to share so much of your process with us today. We do have a number of questions, but because we are short on time, what I'd like to do is just go ahead and stop the recording. And then once I do that, I can unmute everyone and they'll have a chance to just talk with you directly and get any questions answered.
Okay.
A quick reminder to everyone as well to visit aacgglass.org so you can sign up and join AACG and take advantage of everything that we have to offer. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you very much, Ian.
You're welcome.